Welcome to At the Gate, a show where we talk about things that help us to live and love more like Jesus each and every day. My name is Pastor John.
I'm Pastor Eric. Welcome.
Today, Eric, we're going to talk about the names of God.
Nice. That's a large subject. We're probably going to get partway through it,
Yep.
but it can be very informative and helpful to us in our understanding of who God is.
So let's start simply with people may be listening and may not have an idea of what we're talking about with the names of God, because we serve the one true God, but he has all of these different aspects to him. And so we have these things, I'm going to say colloquial or kind of common tongue, we say they're the names of God. But what are they truly?
They are descriptors of who he is, his attributes. You know, sometimes we have nicknames that we make up that are funny. You call a shorter person big guy or something like that, as a matter of fact. There are times when we were just having a discussion about Jesus and his disciples, that Peter was the guy that was always up and down. What does Jesus name him?
Cephas.
He wants you to become Cephas. I want you to become a rock.
Yeah.
So I think in many cases we give these nicknames or descriptors. In Hebrew culture was to what you want somebody to become, but for us it's often a descriptor of who the person is.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at what we call the names of God, we're looking for descriptors of his character, which we often call his attributes. And so they're good reminders to us of who God is and what he's all about.
And we're going to kind of be going through, these names of God are tied to stories of God coming through for his people a lot of times. And in those stories, either God says something about his character or a character attribute is given to God, and these names come from them. What are the reasons why we as Christians should know these stories, these names?
So a couple of things. One is that God is revealing himself from beginning to end. He starts off with I am that I am to Moses when we talk about Yahweh, his basic name. And each of the subsequent stories, or even ones before, reveal how God interacts with us. And as individuals realize, oh, my God isn't just like the other gods. That's important to remember, is that the concept of gods early on was that there were many gods, and they each had their own territories. So if we remember all the way back with the battles with the Philistines, they would say, well, we lost this battle. Well, that's because their God is the God of the hills. And they had a misunderstanding about the one true God, that they thought he only fights in the hills. So now we'll fight them in the plains. And they lose there. And says, well, obviously he's the God of the plains too. And what God is demonstrating to them, he's the God of all and the God of everything. So
Kind of Jonah-esque.
Yes.
Right, the story of Jonah going out with the sailors and, well, your God is the God of both. They freak out.
Yeah, and to realize our God is so much bigger and has so many aspects to him. And so people would then recognize that aspect to God, that attribute of God, and include an addition to his name to describe what they had just learned about God. And it's a wonderful way for God to reveal his ever-expanding attributes to a people that are slowly progressing in their knowledge and understanding of who God is.
And it can act as, we talked before about Ebenezer's and about mental Ebenezer's and about just our God being the same God that we see in scriptures coming to us today. So part of the reason why these names are so important is because they also show us today real stories of how our God came through in these different attributes. So I think the first one, a great example is Jehovah Shalom. Our God is a God of peace.
Right.
And the story that goes along with that is it's Gideon. God appears to Gideon, right? And maybe you want to walk us through just kind of that beginning part. So God appears to Gideon and he kind of freaks out a little bit.
What a fascinating thing. That's probably going to take us in a slight detour, if I might. And that's that we are told in the text that God shows up. It's the time when, again, the Midianites are terrorizing Israel. They're raiding and they're ferocious. And Gideon is actually taken to the place where he's hiding down in this pit where they usually grind grain in order that he might not be found by these Midianites. And it says that God comes to him. It says the angel of the Lord came to him. And what is helpful for us in recognizing the angel of the Lord is actually Jesus before he was born, the pre-incarnation, what we call a Christophany or a theophany.
Right, the corporeal form of Jesus coming down.
Right.
Right.
And we would say, well, no, it says it's an angel. It says, no, it's the angel of the Lord. And we're able to discern that it's God himself, because no angel of God would accept worship. We remember what Gideon says. He's afraid. Jesus says, don't be afraid. It's okay. He goes, well, if you're really there, let me go make an offering. And he goes, he makes the offering, he comes back, and the angel of the Lord accepts that offering. No ordinary angel would accept an offering.
Right.
That only goes to God. So the angel accepting the offering means the angel is God. It's Jesus. And so when you see the angel of the Lord, you know that it's a theophany or Christophany.
Right. And so the angel consumes it. It says it's consumed with fire, and he disappears. And it says Gideon is terrified because he knows that he's seen God, and he thinks he's going to die. Yeah. And that's where Jehovah Shalom comes in.
Yes.
It says that the Lord spoke to Gideon and said, no, I am a God of peace.
Right, which is kind of ironic within the context of the story.
100%.
In the midst of all this persecution and raiding and war, and he's going to lead people into war, God is saying, but I'm the God of peace, and you need not be afraid. God wants us to understand that his incredible power and awesomeness is not something we should be afraid of, because he cares for us. And what a great reminder is that God calls us not only to be people who engage him in peace, but then to be people of peace ourselves.
Yeah. Interesting that the idea of this Prince of Peace, this Lord of Peace, is an attribute that we find in Isaiah as well for Jesus. But what do you take out of having a God who is a God of peace? Jehovah Shalom.
Yeah, having that God of peace means that while I need to respect and be in awe of him, I do not have to fear him, because I know that he has my best interests at heart. And that's hard for so many people, because we look at God and we recognize he's a father figure, but he's the perfect father, and none of us had, growing up, human perfect fathers. I was afraid of my stepfather. I didn't really have at the core of my being the idea that he always had my best interests at heart. And that was an unfortunate place for the two of us to be. We managed to work that out. But as a result, those early fears stuck with me. And sometimes when I think of God, I'm afraid that he's going to punish me, or he's going to be unfair with me. And to remember that he's a God of peace who has my best interests at heart, that was incredibly important for me to grasp and to continue to re-grasp. Because there's times when I have sinned against God, I've betrayed people, and I feel utterly worthless and like he's going to really take it out on me, and then have to remember, no, he's a God of peace. I don't know if that resonates with any of your experience.
It does. And I tend to use this idea as I'm facing down, very much like Gideon was facing down trials and tribulations. He says he was the least of the least of the least, right? And God puts him in a place of raising him up. In Judges, like that's the cycle. God raises up this guy who helps bring peace back to Israel. And he's facing this army that's the size of the sand, the grains of sand on the seashore. And when we're faced with trials of that kind, when we're faced with tribulations and overwhelming odds, to know that we have a God who desires for us to enter into his peace and trust in him. That's Jehovah Shalom. That's our God who can bring us that peace.
Right. So in turmoil, and there's times in my life where I'm not sure about the future, I'm not sure about what's going on, how a circumstance is going to work out, to remember that Jesus would show up, and he would, especially post-resurrection, first thing he said to everybody who saw him, peace be with you. We are called to be a people of peace. And the reason is it's a reflection of who God is.
Yeah. I love the names of God so much. They're so rad.
Well, what's another one that really resonates with you?
Well, I think one of the most popular names of God, Maverick City had a song that came out a number of years ago now called Jireh.
Okay.
And I think that really kind of put a re-emphasis on the idea of the names of God. So Jehovah Jireh comes from the story of Abraham taking Isaac up to be sacrificed in Genesis 22. And he was walking in faith to go and to do what God was asking him to. And he gets all the way there, and then God stops him from the sacrifice, and behind him in the bush is the necessary sacrifice, and it says that the Lord will provide. Jehovah Jireh. Now, we were actually having an interesting conversation. The reason why I wanted to talk about this, the cons of putting power just in these names of God and forgetting all the other aspects. We were actually on our worship team. We just have started critically looking at all the songs that we're doing and trying to see if they're corporate worship songs, if they are a worshiping of God, if they mention the names of God, or if they're just kind of the love song gods. And actually, one of the elders in our church happened to mention in Jireh, there's no a mention of God outside of saying Jireh.
Okay.
And I had never considered this before, but saying that is an attribute of God, but not necessarily God himself, because Jireh in and of itself just means provider.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And especially separated from Jehovah Jireh or Yahweh Jireh, the idea of our God who provides. So Jehovah Jireh, as our Lord, as provider, is a good thing.
It's a wonderful thing. We also have to be careful with the names of God, because sometimes we emphasize one because it fits our agenda.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really need to make my my bills this month, so God's Jehovah Jireh. Or I really have a different need in my life relationally. God's going to provide a way for that to work out. Not necessarily, and not every time. First Peter talks about people suffering for God, and I'm sure each of them are praying that God would provide solutions to their problems or to their struggles. And in fact, God is not providing solutions to their struggles, but providing solutions to their growth.
Importantly, Jehovah Jireh provides what you need, not what you want.
Correct.
Jehovah Jireh is the God who will provide what you need, not the God who provides whenever you just necessarily ask of him.
Yes, you can't put enough prayer quarters into the vending machine and then pick your candy.
Right. And I know from your experience and from my experience, there are often times that God will provide exactly what we need, almost in direct contrast to what I'm asking, because he needs me to remember I am the God who provides what you need on my time, and what's best for you and what's best for me and for my glory.
Yep. And it can be very unexpected. I mean, the story we're citing with Abraham and Isaac, I remember Isaac saying, we have the wood and and we have the knife, but and the rope, but where's the sacrifice? And Abraham says, don't worry, my God will provide. And in one sense, he already had, because Isaac was provided by God in a supernatural way. So he had already provided once, and I'm sure I can only imagine the grief that Abraham is feeling over this son born in his old age with really no other hopes. And yet he says, I'm going to trust God to provide. And if this is the way he provides, then so be it. Hebrews tells us that Abraham actually believed that God could raise Isaac from the dead. So he was trusting in God's provision and following him in spite of the fact it didn't look like anything he would choose to do. And then, as you mentioned, he's got the knife up, he's ready to strike, and he's actually, the scripture indicates through the tenses of the original Hebrew words, he's got a made-up mind. He's doing it, and God stops him at that moment. And then he looks over and he sees a ram caught in a bush.
Yeah.
God provides in incredible and amazing ways that we don't expect, and not necessarily on our timetable. I don't like feeling stressed out over God needing to provide for me, or what I believe God needs to provide for me when I believe. I want space, I want margin, and sometimes God is saying, I need you to grow closer to me. I need you to trust me as the one who provides, and the way I'm going to provide. That is such a faith struggle, but it's a growth place where God is more concerned about my character for eternity than my present circumstances.
And how cool, because I don't know about you, but my default is to be a provider. I think that's a very common struggle, especially as men, as fathers, as husbands, to want to be the provider. And the number of times that I've gotten to places in my life where I've looked at my wife and said, God's got to do this one. I can't.
Yeah.
That heartbreak that I feel ends up leading to a lot of growth and a lot of joy in my life as as I no longer try to do what God wants to do in my life and in his daughter's life, my wife's life.
Yeah.
So I think Jehovah Jireh, the thing that I love about these attributes, these names of God, is not necessarily that I'm calling upon a different God, but especially in my prayer life, I've found to be able to stop and say, my God is the God who sees me, El Roi. My God is the God who wants to provide for me, Jehovah Jireh. My God is the one who wants to bring peace into my life and into the life of my wife and my child, Jehovah Shalom. And to be able to say those names to me doesn't have mystical power. It has the power to bring that Ebenezer back to the front of my brain of the scriptural stories of him coming through for his people.
And knowing where they came from, we can relate to them. So we're talking about Abraham and Isaac, and you see God provide unusual ways in his own timing. As a father, you provide your daughter with what she needs, not necessarily what she wants.
It's hard to not just give her what she wants because she's so cute. But yes, I try.
And you want to give what's best for her in the long run rather than in the immediate satisfaction area. So if we remember those stories, if we remember our own experiences and how they relate, the names, attributes of God become very powerful. Mm-hmm. God's going to provide, and I'm not sure how, but he always has. He says he always will. I may not agree with what he's going to do or when or how, but that's okay, because what he's going to have is better for me than anything I could conceive of for myself.
Yeah.
You mentioned the God who sees already.
Yeah,
you kind of tipped your hand, so let's talk about that story.
El Roi, fascinating, because as I go through and I was doing all these studies and running through different lists that people were compiling, it wasn't until we as a church went through Genesis that I saw El Roi for the first time. Mm-hmm. And it's Hagar, and she's just gotten pregnant by Abraham at Sarah's request. And then when Sarah finds out that she's pregnant, she freaks out. Hagar runs away, and God comes and finds her in the desert. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the most fascinating parts about this, and hopefully you can give us some more context around this, who Hagar is in relation to God, and yet she is revealed to give us this name, this attribute of God.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of interesting things. First, we're remembering her origin is Egyptian. She's an Egyptian woman who's been living as the servant of Sarai, for all those years. So she's exposed to God. She's aware of God. And she even has a promise because of Abraham's faith fulfilled to her. Because if we remember, she gives birth and everybody's excited. And God says, no, Abraham, not quite the way I was planning on providing. You kind of stepped outside of my will, and I'm going to give you a baby from Sarah. He goes, well, can't this son live under your blessing? He goes, yes, he will. So God blesses Hagar and Ishmael, even though it's not God's plan, for the sake of Abraham. So realizing that people sometimes get blessed because God wants to bless us and others as a result is a real thing, but I can't command it. It's something that God grants.
Yeah.
However, the second thought that is interesting is you notice this isn't a Jehovah name. Mm-hmm. This is El, and El is the shortened version of the generic name for God. So instead of saying Yahweh or Jehovah, right. She says El, which shows probably her Egyptian background.
Right.
You are a God, but amazingly, you're the one who sees me no matter where I am. So that territorial thing comes into play again. And you're aware of my plight. I'm just a slave, a servant. I have no social standing. I don't live under your promises per se. And nevertheless, you see me. You acknowledge me. That's got to be exciting for those of us who feel less than.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it comes down to for me. Yes, our God is omnipotent. He's omnipresent. He's omniscient. He's got all these different omni attributes of being
omni being
everything,
present everywhere,
right.
All powerful, all knowing.
All knowing. Okay. But to me, El Roi is a story of the personal God, the God who's willing to come down, meet Hagar in the desert, and reaffirm her, go back to where you were, go back to Sarah, go back to that situation because I am there.
Yeah.
Because I am with you.
Yeah.
And what what God can we possibly imagine outside of the God that's revealed to us in Scripture that would have that personal relationship with Hagar, of all people, to come down to a slave of Abraham in the desert? It blows my mind.
And to know there's a longing in our souls to be known, to know others and to be known. And when God is looking at Hagar and saying, I see you, I'm reminded of a lot of the modern movies and shows that are on, and people are now saying, I see you. And they're articulating something that is a basic human need. That's to be known and to know other people.
Yeah.
And to be known and loved for who you are. That's what Hagar is saying, is that you know me for who I am. You see me, even though the rest of the world doesn't. Even though the rest of the world doesn't care. I'm a concubine. I'm a slave. I'm a woman in a patriarchal society. And yet you see me. You're a God who cares enough to see me. Mm-hmm. That speaks to the deep need each of us have in our soul to be known.
Yeah. I'm going to try my best to remember to give you the references of where all these names are. So that's Genesis 16.
Yep.
I think we did that for Jehovah Shalom, Jehovah Jireh, Genesis 22. I wanted to make sure we touched on, just like Jehovah Jireh gets used, I don't want to say out of context, but I'm going to say out of context sometimes. Sure. The next one I want to kind of touch on, Jehovah Rapha, I think can also be used out of context. So we're in Exodus 15 now. This is where we see Jehovah Rapha. This is after Miriam's song, and the Israelites are in the desert, and they come across this water, and it's bitter, and it's bad for them.
Yeah.
And they start yelling at Moses, and they're like, you brought us all the way out here to die. But then this story of Jehovah Rapha comes in.
Right. And the water is they are healed from the water. So God heals. And we often look at that, and people will claim it. I'm gonna pray that your cancer goes away. I'm gonna pray to Jehovah Rapha, because if we pray that, then God's going to heal you of that cancer. And that's unfortunate on many levels. One, it assumes that we can make God do our will. Sometimes we end up with cancer because God's going to use that. God didn't cause the cancer. That's a natural effect, I think, of the fall. That's us shooting ourselves in the foot, metaphorically speaking. But God uses those difficulties and those struggles to bring glory to himself and to help us. I would have last year I had a health scare. I was down for 4 months with a blood infection, a ruptured gallbladder, and not knowing if I was going to be in this world or the next world for almost a week was an interesting time for me. And I know that there were so many people that were willing to pray for me, and I don't know if there was nobody came up to me and said, I prayed to Jehovah Rapha, but that sort of thing happens.
Yeah.
That because we invoked that attribute or that name of God, that therefore he's going to do it.
Right.
And that's just wrong, because we don't have that control over God. He's the one who decides. And God used my struggle to bring glory to himself through getting to share with people in the hospital, with doctors, with nurses, to watch people praying and lifting and interceding. Those are all things that God was using that illness to bring glory to himself and to invoke a spiritual growth in the lives of everybody, including myself.
Yeah.
So that was my experience with the healing that could have been misapplied, but we see God bringing healing, not just physically, but also spiritually to people, which is probably the bigger thing.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. We could start sounding like naysayers here and saying that, again, we've talked about these are great Ebenezers for us as we think about the attributes of God. We're not denying that Jehovah Rapha, God, in his attribute as a healer, will heal, but it has to be according to his will.
And his glory.
Mm-hmm. But just like Jehovah Shalom, just like El Roi, thinking about those names of God, those are true attributes of God. God is a God of healing.
Yes.
God is the great physician. He is the one who can heal all things. But what we're saying is there's no power in the name Jehovah Rapha, because Jehovah Rapha is a descriptor of Yahweh, of our God.
Right. We don't want to make the Beetlejuice mistake,
Okay.
where we say the name enough times and then we get what we wanted.
I think our producer might be too young for Beetlejuice, so I think you might.
Beetlejuice 2 just came out.
Did it?
Didn't it come out yet? Yeah.
Oh, he knows what Beetlejuice is. That's all right.
And it's a cult favorite.
Yeah.
But the idea that you get him to say the name and
Right.
it has to happen.
Right, exactly.
You don't get God to say his name and it has to happen. That's a theological error. I'm going to call it the Beetlejuice theological heresy.
Beetlejuice. Here comes a new book by Eric Clark. Watch for it in bookstores. The Beetlejuice error. Oh, Eric.
Nevertheless, the idea that we trust God to do the right thing and to heal, whether that I was just thinking about that. If I'm laying in a bed and I don't know where I'm going to wake up, and I actually had that thought, I don't know where I'm going to wake up.
Yeah.
And I thought, in either case, I'm healed. I'm healed for more time here on this planet, or I'm healed completely of everything in heaven. And both are healings, and both are just fine. I know we have preferences. We want to keep loved ones around. Sometimes we need to recognize that it's better to be with him than it is to remain where we are. That can be hard because we love people, we miss them, we care about them, we don't want to lose them. But even quote unquote losing them is only temporary.
Yeah.
We're both followers. When you lose me, you're going to have to look forward to spending eternity with me later on.
I will look forward.
That's good to know at this point in time.
Yeah. All right. I want to hit one more name before we end today.
Okay.
Because I think Jehovah Shalom is incredible. But that idea of allowing us to know that we have a God who wants to bring us peace is awesome. The name, the attribute that I lean on more is Jehovah Nissi,
Okay.
which comes from a story in Exodus 17 where Moses and the Israelites are battling the Amalekites. And I think the reason why this resonates so much with me is because it is just God doing what God does. And Moses goes up on top of the hill with Aaron and with Hur, and he says, I'm going to raise my hands. And he raises his hands, and every time his hands are up, the Israelites are winning the battle. And anytime he gets tired and his hands start to sink, the Amalekites begin to win.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this beautiful story of God as our banner, as our victory, the one that we can stand behind and allow to win for us. And Aaron and Hur come and hold his arms up.
Yeah.
And so Moses and the people around him helping him, but ultimately it's God working through them.
Yep. And the picture is amazing. When God is for us, I think Romans says, who can be against us?
Mm-hmm.
And for him to say we're proclaiming our God was important and exciting. But when we begin to involve others in that we stand behind God, not just me, but we. So having his brother and having her alongside him, holding up his hands, is a fantastic picture of the church saying, if our God is for us, who can be against us? And we struggle with things that oppress upon us as a church, as a faith, as a people of God, whether it's society or people attempting to pass laws or infringing on our ability to worship. Those things can be daunting, overwhelming, if we don't put ourselves under God's banner and say, we're here no matter what. We're going to worship God no matter what you say. I think about how much the church, especially in the Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, the church was persecuted. It was illegal, and people still met, and they still prayed, and they still worshiped, and they had to do so in secret, but they didn't fail to stand for God. They said, he is our banner. He is the one we worship. God first, everything else second. That should give us courage.
Yeah.
That should allow us to stand up under persecution. And I read regularly about believers, whether it's in a workplace or in a social environment, saying, I'm going to stand for God regardless of how you treat me, regardless of what's going on, because my God is the one I follow. He's the one that covers me.
Yeah. And we recently in my ministry as a worship team took a step back last November and took some time to really reflect on what God was doing. And I had this beautiful moment with one of my friends that are on the worship team, and he was praying because we weren't all sure what God was trying to do during that time. But he brought this story up to me, and it was such an encouragement to say, he said, you're following what God has for us. And God put it on his heart that it wasn't just about one person, though, following God. It was about the people who came alongside of people. And he said, I want to be your her. I want to be your Aaron. I want to help encourage you and strengthen you as you follow God. And I thought that was just one of the most beautiful things I've ever been told in my walk in ministry. But that would be my encouragement. Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is our banner. Trusting in him, but especially if you find yourself in the trusting of God, to have people around you that you're going to allow to help you follow God well and to be obedient to God well.
If you are following God, and the Shema, Deuteronomy chapter 6, we've talked about that before. Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and strength. If you are doing that, if you're following him, others will want to be with you. Others will support you. Others will be there. And just as a quick aside, dads, husbands, if you're following God with all your heart, that's what it means to lead your family. Your family will want to follow you if they perceive you are following God with all of your heart. That is spiritual leadership. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable. You don't have to have the greatest prayers. Just follow Jesus with everything you've got. Let him be your banner, and others will come alongside you. They will lift you up and be a part of that process.
Amen. All right. We'll probably have to make a part 2 as we go through more attributes of God. But as we talk about Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is our banner to trust in him, to follow. Jehovah Rapha, our Lord who heals. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Jehovah Shalom, our God is peace. El Roi, the God who sees us. These are meant to be things that can encourage you as you explore who God is and all of his many attributes. And we encourage you, go to the scriptures, read these stories, allow them to fill you with the knowledge and the peace of who our God is and what he wants to be in your life. But this was such a fun conversation.
Always is.
Glad we got to have this.
I enjoy our times together. God bless you, and make God your banner.